Welcome to the Good Medicine Podcast. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, or good night, or whatever time you happen to be listening to this. I want to set some ground principles for my podcast, some of the core principles that I believe in, and I want to specifically dedicate this podcast to the concept of free speech. I am a unapologetic defender of unlimited free speech. The late, great Christopher Hitchens, who I happen to admire very much, a very eloquent speaker. Many of you may know who he is. If not, I highly recommend you listen to him. I've read quite a few of his books. I've listened to many of his speeches, and so I know him pretty well. He had given what I thought was the best defense of free speech I'd ever heard, and you can find that broadcast on YouTube by typing in Christopher Hitchens free speech, and it's a speech where he starts out with fire, fire. And he's given this speech in Canada, and he is basically talking or refuting or arguing against a lot of the laws there in Canada that are restricting free speech. Certainly people like Mark Stein had run into this with lawsuits and prosecutions and so forth, and quite a few other people have too. And I think Hitchens does a fantastic job of defending free speech, and I'm going to put a link in so you can also check it out yourself. But he brings up, I think I really want to kind of go over a little bit of his speech here. He brings up a very, very important point that we really have to ponder and think about. But first of all, before I get to that, I want to say a little bit about Christopher Hitchens. He considered himself, and this is quote, very much a man on the left, unquote. He said that quite a few times. And he mentioned some left-wing philosophers like John Stuart Mills in his speech. And he wrote for a lot of left-wing publications when he was alive. Certainly a lot of left-wing people accused him of drifting to the right. And so he had reiterated very clearly many times, I am very much a man on the left. And I bring this up because he is really arguing against what would be today left-wing censorship in Canada, United States, Australia, Europe, that has really taken a hold and has basically really put a lot of people in jail, particularly in Europe and England, for things that are not in line with today's liberalism, as I could say. There were at least, I think, 5 cases, one recently, and I just mentioned this stuff off the top of my head because I don't remember all the details, but there's one particular gentleman in England recently in the last few weeks who was sentenced to 2 years in prison for distributing, I think it was flyers or stickers or something like that, and I'm not sure what those stickers said, but whatever they were not certainly in line with today's liberal ideology or the state liberal ideology there in Great Britain. And this is what Hitchens was arguing against, because he does bring up David Irving. And for those of you who don't know who David Irving is, he was a British historian, and according to Hitchens, was a very good one. Actually, he thought he was excellent as a historian, and this is coming from someone who's very well read. But David Irving, as part of his history of World War II, he denies the Holocaust. And David Irving had done something a lot of historians hadn't done. He actually went and actually interviewed people firsthand who were involved in World War II, who have some kind of name recognition. So it's kind of coming from a very different angle. But he does deny the Holocaust, and David Irving was jailed and was threatened to be jailed, as Hitchens says, for simply committing a thought crime. And Hitchens strongly defends Irving's right to free speech to deny the Holocaust. And even though, of course, Hitchens doesn't agree with it, and I don't agree with it either, but I agree with Hitchens that even if you have a very unpopular opinion, even if it's wrong, that you should be able to express that opinion. Certainly there has been, I think from the Biden administration, this idea that they should censor misinformation. Well, who gets to determine what is misinformation? That is a question. And at the beginning of Hitchens' speech, he asked us to keep in mind, just who gets to decide, what you can and cannot read, what you can and cannot say. And later on in the speech, he asks a question to everyone in the crowd, and no one answers. And this is a lot of liberals there in Canada. Name one person. Think of anyone. And this is a question that is really for everybody listening to this also. Name one person you will decide that will be the censor, that will censor information for the benefit of all of us. Can you think of one person who you will give that job to, that can decide what I can and cannot read, what you can and cannot read? And I think at the end of his speech, he also says something that I think is very important to remember. And he is really going after his fellow liberals here and saying that you are making a whip for your own back. And he certainly goes on and talks about what are you going to do when the religious people, religious fanatics, say you cannot, ban you said something against my holy text, and that is hate speech. So if they can then turn it around and say, listen, what you did is hate speech. Now I'm going to jail you for criticizing my Quran, my Bible, Book of Mormon, or whatever it is. And this is something very important to remember, and I think that can be done. I heard there was a case here recently where someone was jailed in America for burning a gay pride rainbow flag. Apparently they were jailed for arson, and I think there was a couple other charges in there, like inciting hatred or whatever it is. But that very law could be used by someone like Trump or a conservative to throw Black Lives Matters in jail for burning the American flag or burning the Bible. So you have a law, basically hate speech laws, that can be used as a double-edged sword against you also, if you happen to be liberal, or you happen to support Black Lives Matter, or you want to burn the American flag or whatever. You will inevitably have that coming back upon you. And I think Hitchens' position, which is a position that I strongly support, is that even though someone has an extremely unpopular viewpoint or opinion, they should be able to express that. Now, I know Amazon has banned a very long list of books. I know Alex Jones has been banned from YouTube, and there's been all kinds of people banned from social media. I think Alex Jones was really kind of led the way on this, where he was deplatformed from many things, Twitter, you name it. And of course, what followed were many other people who had viewpoints that um, were not popular with those in charge of those platforms. But we go back to Hitchens' question: who gets to determine what you get to listen to or read? Um, and if today it is some left-wing people on YouTube ban you, tomorrow, why not Elon Musk, who seems to be leaning right, banning you on his new Twitter/X? Or maybe what if he buys YouTube and decides to ban left-wing people? Because now he can use that same rule, law, as a whip against you. And my position is that free speech is that you could be wrong, you could be misinformed, you could be outrageous, offensive, and the way we deal with that is not by banning you, but we fight free speech with more free speech. And the other problem with putting people in jail, as this man was in England, is all this is just now going to go underground. Now people will pass out flyers and stickers, and now the police are going to have to spend tons of time figuring out who did it because they're going to be hiding their identity. So the truth of the matter is, it's not going to go away. People are going to say what they're going to say regardless. When we think of people banning speech, we think of George Orwell's book, 1984. We think of maybe China. We think of Russia. We think of, people in Russia going to prison for saying things that the government doesn't like, or people in China disappearing for saying things that are not in line with the Communist Party. And here in America, it may be lighter, but we now have people going to prison in Europe and America for what was, at one point, considered free speech. This should be very alarming. I can't emphasize this enough because the tyrannical impulse only grows. And I think, unfortunately, today it is certainly coming from the left wing, definitively coming from left wing sources to ban speech. I had debated with some of them. I was at a Trump rally back in 2015-16 in downtown St. Louis, and it was very interesting. I had met some of them. They were with Antifa and Black Lives Matter and anti-Trumpers and what have you. And they showed up with kind of vile signs, and they had their fingers in the air saying F Trump, F the police, signs saying Nazi, and all kinds of just kind of really nasty FU signs, and people wearing masks and being intimidating and issuing threats and what have you. And I talked to a few of them, and they felt that it was okay to interrupt someone's speech, which they've done. I think they interrupted quite a few speakers at college campuses, even had little riots. They told me that you should not be able to say things that are harmful or hateful and so on and so forth. So they really did have this whole ideal of that it was okay to limit someone else's speech. Now, certainly, they're the ones who get to determine what that is. And this tyrannical impulse that I think Hitchens is warning us against, because it can swing right. I remember in the 1980s when I was in high school, I had a foster mother for a short period of time. And this is a really interesting little story. She was what I consider like hyper religious. So I used to go to her house sometimes on the weekends from the children's home, and all weekend, Saturday, Sunday, it was nothing but church. So Saturday evening, you had the preacher on all day, all night, and then Sunday morning, the preacher was on, and you went to church. went to church 3 times a Sunday. You went for first service, and you went back and ate lunch, and then you came home, and then you went back and for Sunday evening service. So she was very, very excessively religious, um, to the point where I found it somewhat alarming. Anyway, after I guess things didn't work out with us, and I was in high school, and I remember she had came up to the high school, and she was on the warpath. She wanted to ban the book The Catcher in the Rye. It had, I guess, some language or words or phrases in there she did not like, and she was demanding the high school ban the book. She did not win that battle, but she certainly was up there quite a few times trying to get it banned. And I would say I would consider her a very right-winged evangelical type of person. And I know back in the 80s there were a lot of evangelicals who were wanting to censor song lyrics from rock and roll stars. They were wanting to even ban some of them. They were wanting to put labels on the records like rated R. They were wanting to do the same thing with video games. So certainly this impulse to censor isn't just from left wing as it is today. It certainly comes from right wing sources also. But to me, it doesn't really matter where it's coming from, left, right, center, or whoever's trying to do it. I think that the desire to censor anything is tyrannical, and it doesn't matter who's doing it, we must oppose it. And I think the best way to learn is to learn from many sources. And here's some good medicine for you. I think that you have to be eclectic. And what I mean by that word eclectic is that you have to be able to draw from many sources. You have to be able to listen to many sources. There's a lot of bad information out there. I'll give you, for example, a topic that I was into for a long time was self-help. I think there's a lot of bad self-help information out there. There's good information out there too. Some of it I think is even harmful or downright misleading. Now, should we ban all those things? And who gets to decide to ban it? But you can find misinformation, people talking about health or religion or politics or whatever. And there's just a sea of information out there. And the only way we're really going to learn is if we take things in, listen to everything, all sides, and then think for ourselves. In the art of brainwashing, there's a thing called thought control, or thought reform, is what it's called, thought reform. And how thought reform works is you take somebody and you isolate them and you give them only one message. So this is what a lot of people who get involved in cults, they get in there and they're told that the outside messages are from the devil or are wrong or evil, and so they get isolated in the group, isolated away from their family and friends, and then this message, whatever it is from whatever group, is repeated over and over and over. And so you get to the point where you also begin to self-censor because the information that's not of this group or organization or leader is evil or wrong, and so you simply don't listen to it. In philosophy, there's a thing called, let me think, what is that? It is confirmation bias. So people tend to censor themselves because they only look at information that agrees with what they already believe in. So if they're right wing, they may only listen to Fox News. If they're left wing, they may only listen to CNN or MSNBC. And my thing is, I will listen to anybody on any topic regardless of their position. So I listen to left-wing positions, I will tell you this, and I'm not ashamed to admit this. I definitely lean right, politically. But that doesn't mean I'm dogmatic or that I'm not willing to change my mind or admit I'm not right. I'm certainly willing to admit I'm wrong. But I will listen to, and I do, and I have, even to this day, listened to a great deal of left wing thought or opinions. I don't think it's a matter of one position being totally right, another position being totally wrong. I certainly think there are a lot of left wing ideals and concepts that I like, um, and sometimes I agree with them. Um, but by and large, I do not. Nevertheless, I'm certainly willing to listen to anything anybody has to say, whether it's a libertarian or right wing, left wing, or something totally different. Um, so that's why I emphasize the point of us being eclectic, being able to draw from many sources and not just limit yourself to that which you're going to agree with. You end up in an echo chamber. And I think too many people end up in an echo chamber and, anything that disagrees with what they already believe, they reject. Certainly any and all information should be open, but the only way you're going to do that is if you have free speech. If Amazon is banning books, which they are, then you can't hear another side or another viewpoint you never thought of before because the book is banned, or you may not get exposed to it. You're going to have to go somewhere else. I am a big fan of some of these kind of off the beaten path websites where they sell, I guess not necessarily banned books, but books that you won't find in the mainstream. Because I kind of like to see how other people think about things that are outside the box, that aren't with what you would find on Fox News or CNN, something that is totally different. I've been fascinated. Why do people deny the Holocaust? And I think most people, I would say 99% of people or more, if they were to argue with David Irving about the Holocaust, they would lose that debate. Not because he's right, but because they simply don't know anything about what he has to say. How can you refute what he says if you don't know what he says? You would be at a loss in a debate with him. You would look bad at the very least. Even if people agreed with you, I think most people would come away thinking, well, you look terrible in that debate. Yeah, I agreed with you. David Irving's wrong, but he just mopped the floor with you. And, they'd have to cringe. They wouldn't want you to get back up there and argue with them again because you're making the position they agree with look bad. So the only way to really confront anybody on any topic is to know what they got to say about it. And you're not going to be given a chance to do that if they're banning those books. Now, I certainly know that there's the very famous Nazi book burnings. I don't know exactly what books they burned, but from what I have heard, they were probably left-wing books that the Nazis didn't agree with. Maybe books that were pornographic or sexual or whatever. And here again, my position is I don't agree with. It doesn't matter who's banning the books or what they think, whether it's the Nazis or today's left wing or religious conservatives or whatever. That information should be out there, and we should be able to confront it head on by knowing what they say. And the Nazi book burnings did no good because whatever books they burned, whatever topics they were burning, I'm not sure what they were. I'm sure that information is out there still floating around for you to find. Um, so it will just go underground. Another thing people will do is when you start banning speech, as they're very much doing in Europe now, is they'll start talking around the topic. They'll start speaking in code and really then hiding that speech. And once you figured out what the code is, they'll change it on you. It's like a cat and mouse game. And maybe they talk around it so much, it's so vague that you really can't nail them on it. So they're going to say it anyway. That's the truth of the matter. One way or another, they're going to get around you, and they're going to say it. You know, if they aren't going to burn the gay pride flag in public, they'll burn it. You know, in private. You know, they'll do like the KKK does and put hoods on and burn them. So it's not. It's useless. Ultimately, censorship is useless. The only way we're going to know um, truth is if we get all the information that's out there. Now, I happen to be a very spiritual person, and I do believe in God. Um, and I know my hero here, I started this speech off, Christopher Hitchens, he was very much anti-theist, as he said. But nevertheless, I do believe in God. And I think that if there is a God, that God sees and hears everything, and therefore we should be like God and hear and see everything too. And that's the only way we're going to know more. So I do highly recommend that you go listen to Hitchens' speech, and I think you should listen to it maybe more than once, and really let this seep in, because there is at least one message I think that is good medicine that I want you to have. I hope to win you over to this argument that we should have unlimited free speech. Now, certainly, I'm not advocating for child porn or things like that, and I can understand why Facebook doesn't want to have someone putting jihad terrorist on there, cutting off someone's head or something like that. So I get it. But I'm really not talking about these extreme criminal fringe type of things being, I guess, censored in certain circumstances. What I'm talking about is general speech, that we should be able to say opinions that aren't popular. If David Irvin or someone else wants to talk about why they don't believe the Holocaust happened, that should not be illegal. Okay, and they shouldn't be fired or maligned or attacked for that. Certainly, in America today, I think people can be fired from their job for maybe saying some things they aren't supposed to say. So this is really where we're getting into a very dangerous situation, a very tyrannical situation, because I think once you start banning speech successfully, then you're going to the next step, all right? Because they're going to start, getting a lot worse, and we have, I guess, people in prison for thought crimes, and this is, it's almost something like out of George Orwell's book. There's a good movie that kind of goes along this lines called Brazil. I love that movie, by the way. It's a movie I highly recommend. But you have a tyrannical government that is banning all kinds of things, including opinions that are not popular. And there's some really good scenes in there. And it does kind of take after that George Orwell type of thinking. And I once again, I just highly recommend you watch that movie, Brazil. It's also entertaining, a little bit funny, but also it does have kind of a serious point about really the dystopian type of world we can actually end up in. I don't think it would be that exaggerated, but it wouldn't be far off. I think we already have that in some parts of the world as it is. you know, go to Iran, Saudi Arabia, China, Russia, and see just how far you're going to get away with pushing the envelope there of free speech. You will find yourself in a hellhole very quick, and we don't want that here. I think prison already, is a hellhole in America. There certainly needs to be prison reform. And just as a side note, just to digress here a little bit, Larry Lawton is another person I highly recommend you listen to. He was in prison for 11 years. He's a former mafia guy, jewel thief that ended up in prison, and he talks a lot about prison and prison reform and what life is like in prison. So, to think that people would go to a place like where Larry Lawton was at for simply having an unpopular opinion is dystopian. It's nightmarish, because prison is not a nice place to be at all. It's not a nice experience. It's rough, and if you've been to prison, you know what I'm saying. If you know somebody who's been to prison, you know what I'm saying. If you don't, listen to Larry Lawton. You will get a good sense of what it's like. And to think that you could be in a place like that for burning a flag that someone is offended by, or saying something that someone doesn't like, is truly dystopian, like these movies, Brazil, or like the movie or the book 1984. So we don't want to go there, and we are going there. We have gone there in Europe already. Um, so listen to Hitchens' thing on free speech, because here on this channel, on one of my podcasts, is I'm going to be talking about a lot of things that nobody else is talking about, and I'll be asking some very tough questions, challenging the high and mighty and the very powerful. And in order to do that, I certainly need free speech, and you need free speech too. So, with that said, thank you for your time, and listen to Hitchens Free Speech, and feel free to comment. Thank you.